32 years old, Harvard Medical School dropout, by choice, founder of a pediatric health company currently valued at $1.4 billion, folding laundry in a Mafia mansion. For now, let that sit for a moment, because before the story ends, before the night that changed everything, before the ballroom doors opened and an entire room of society's most powerful people forgot how to breathe, there was a Tuesday morning in the Marchetti mansion where Amara Cole was on her hands and knees, cleaning crayon off a baseboard in a child's bedroom, wearing a plain cotton uniform she had purchased from a discount retailer for $14.99. $14.99. A woman worth $1.4 billion, dressed in a $14 uniform, scrubbing crayon off a baseboard, while the woman who owned this house was 3 rooms away, laughing on a phone call, not giving Amara Cole a second thought. That was the point. That was always the point. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because first, you need to understand what happened on that Wednesday morning, exactly 47 days into Amara's time in the Marchetti household, when Elena Marchetti said 4 words that she meant as a joke, 4 words that she would spend the next 6 months wishing she could take back. You should come Saturday. The Marchetti mansion sat behind iron gates at the end of a private drive in the kind of neighborhood where the trees had been manicured so long they'd forgotten what natural looked like. The house itself was 4 stories of white stone and black ironwork, with a marble foyer large enough to host a formal dinner and a staircase that curved upward in 2 directions like the arms of something reaching. There were 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a private cinema, a wine cellar that had been written about in architectural magazines, a garden that required its own full-time staff. And somewhere in all of that, somewhere between the Michelin-starred chef, who came 3 times a week, and the security rotation that changed at 6-hour intervals, there was a small room on the 3rd floor, just off the back staircase, with a single window that looked out onto the garden wall. That was Amara's room. She had made it functional within the first week. A notebook on the bedside table, a phone that looked like a budget model but held more encrypted data than most government servers, a calendar on the wall where she tracked schedules, meal times, meeting times, the rhythms of a household that didn't know it was being observed. She had been precise about everything from the beginning. The uniform, plain, cheap, deliberately forgettable. The kind of thing you looked through rather than at. The hair, tied back, covered on the days when she needed to disappear completely into the background. The posture, slightly deferential. Not the posture she was born with, not the posture she'd carried into 100 boardrooms, but a studied approximation of it, practiced in the mirror of that small 3rd-floor room until it felt automatic. Everything about how she presented herself in the Marchetti household had been chosen. Every detail had been decided, which was why, on that Wednesday morning 47 days in, when Elena Marchetti descended the grand staircase in a silk robe and delivered her little joke, Amara Cole already knew exactly how to receive it. The foyer was bright at that hour. Morning light came through the tall windows and scattered across the marble floor in long pale rectangles. Sophia Marchetti, 3 years old, with her father's dark eyes and her own particular genius for making the most ordinary moments feel significant, was sitting in the center of one of those light rectangles, working very seriously on a tower of wooden blocks. Amara sat across from her on the floor, cross-legged, a position she had learned to take without thinking about the price tag of what she'd left behind. "Put this one here," Sophia said, not as a question. "Are you sure? It might fall." "It won't fall. I made it balanced." Sophia said balanced the way 3-year-olds said words they'd heard and decided to own, with complete authority and not quite the right emphasis. Amara had been collecting these moments quietly, like stones. She heard Elena before she saw her, the particular sound of someone who had never needed to be quiet. The heels on marble, the laugh that was always slightly too loud for the space it occupied, the murmur of a one-sided phone conversation in which the other party was clearly the less important person. Elena Marchetti was 36 years old. She was the kind of beautiful that required significant maintenance and made no effort to conceal that fact. The designer robe, the fresh manicure in a shade that Amara had noted cost $400 per appointment, the blonde hair that was currently being handled by 3 specialists twice a month. She wore wealth the way some people wore armor. She came down the staircase without hurrying, without looking, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. She stepped over Sophia's block tower without breaking stride, not around it, over it, without looking down. Sophia watched this happen. Her tower wobbled, did not fall. She had made it balanced after all, but wobbled. Sophia looked at the tower, then at her mother's retreating back, then at Amara. Elena had stopped a few feet away, still on her phone. Still. Amara kept her expression neutral, laughing. But something had shifted in her attention, a flicker of awareness, the kind that wasn't really about the person in front of you, but about the audience you suddenly remembered you had. She turned, looked at Amara, the way you look at something you're trying to remember the purpose of. Actually, she said, dropping her voice to include Amara in the conversation she was about to have at Amara's expense. Hold on a moment. She lowered the phone slightly. We're doing a charity gala Saturday. Marco's thing. The Bellini Grand on 5th. She smiled, the specific smile of someone who had just thought of something clever. You should come. Bring Sophia. It'll be adorable. From the hallway, 2 women appeared, Claudia and Renata, Elena's Constance, her chorus. Fresh from the mansion gym, still holding water bottles, wearing the particular expression of women who knew something entertaining was about to happen. Does she have something to wear? Claudia asked. Not to Amara. About Amara. As though Amara were a subject under discussion, rather than a person in the room. Oh, wear anything nice, Elena said, looking at Amara with that smile still in place. It'll be fun watching you mingle. She said mingle the way you'd say try to swim to someone you knew couldn't. Cocktails start at 7. Black tie. The laughter that followed was not cruel in the way that some cruelty is, hot and deliberate. It was the worst kind. Offhand. Automatic. The laughter of people who had never had to think about whether what they were doing was unkind, because it had never occurred to them that the person receiving it had an interior life worth considering. Elena was already back on her phone, walking away. The conversation concluded as far as she was concerned. Amara looked down at Sophia. Sophia was looking at her with those dark eyes that missed nothing. Pretty lady was mean, Sophia said, quietly, with the precision of a child who understands more than adults assume. Yes, Amara said. She was. She picked up a block, handed it to Sophia. Let's make it taller. And in her mind, clean, clear, completely unaffected by what had just happened. She was already thinking about the Bvlgari set, the necklace, the bracelet, the earrings. Board gift from the IPO. She'd been meaning to wear it somewhere worthy. Saturday. Black tie. The Bellini Grand. Perfect. Drop a heart if you already know exactly where this is going. But before we get to Saturday, before the ballroom doors open and everything changes, you need to understand why Amara Cole was in that mansion in the first place. Because this was not an accident. This was a decision. 6 months in the making. Calculated down to the last detail by a woman who had built a billion-dollar company from a $40,000 personal loan and had never once made a move she hadn't thought 3 steps ahead. 18 months before the gala, Cole Health Innovations had received an acquisition inquiry from a company called Marchetti Group, the legitimate development arm of the Marchetti family business. The proposal was for a joint venture, $300 million to build pediatric health centers in underserved communities across 3 cities. On paper, it was exactly the kind of partnership Amara had been working toward for years. The capital was real. The communities were real. The need was undeniable. But Amara's investigative team had flagged something before the ink dried on the preliminary term sheet. Rumors. Whispers. The specific kind of financial irregularity that doesn't announce itself. It moves through transaction records like smoke. Present only if you know what you're looking for. Possible money laundering. A business history that included associations Amara could not afford to be connected to. If she committed $300 million of her investors' capital to a partnership with the Marchetti family, and that history came to light afterward, it wouldn't just cost money. It would cost every community center, every patient, every child who'd been waiting for something better to arrive. She could have sent lawyers. She could have hired forensic accountants. She could have done the safe, orderly thing that anyone in her position would have done and remained at a careful distance while other people gathered information. But Amara Cole had not built what she had built by remaining at a careful distance. If $300 million and the health of 1,000 children are on the line, she told her COO James Okafor in the meeting where she outlined the plan, I need to see the truth with my own eyes. I need to walk through the door and understand what I'm actually looking at. James had stared at her for a long moment. You're going undercover. I'm taking a temporary position in the household. As a nanny. As a nanny. For how long? As long as it takes. The employment agency had been confused in a way that was almost poignant. Miss Cole, this is an entry-level household position. Live in. The pay is. I understand the terms. It's minimum wage. I'm aware. She had walked into the Marchetti mansion 47 days ago, wearing a $14 uniform and carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies, her natural hair tucked under a plain headscarf, her face clean of the makeup she typically wore to board meetings, her posture adjusted to something smaller than herself. She had walked in and she had watched. She had watched everything. She had learned the rhythms of the household, the patterns of the staff, the way Marco Marchetti moved through his own home, careful, controlled, carrying something heavy that he never put down. She had learned which financial documents passed through the study, which conversations happened in the kitchen after midnight, which decisions Marco made carefully, and which ones Elena made for him, without his knowledge. And now, 47 days in, she knew enough. Marco Marchetti's development operation was legitimate. The money laundering in the family's history was legacy, his father's business, his grandfather's era, activities that Marco had been systematically and carefully closing out for the past 4 years. He wasn't the threat. He was, in fact, the opposite. A man trying to build something clean from a complicated inheritance, paying for sins he hadn't committed. The problem, it turned out, was Elena. Elena Marchetti had been running 3 separate shell accounts through a structure that Marco didn't know existed. The purpose was unclear, possibly personal financial security, possibly something more deliberately criminal, but the legal exposure was significant. If Amara had signed the partnership agreement without knowing about those accounts, the liability would have been catastrophic. She had the information she had come for. She could leave. She kept telling herself she could leave. And then she'd find a reason to stay one more day. And then another. And she told herself it was about tying up loose ends, about being thorough, about not rushing. She tried not to think about the kitchen at midnight. It was Dominic who noticed first. Dominic Reyes had been Marco Marchetti's head of household security for 11 years. Former military, the kind of man who had spent so long reading environments for threat that he had become essentially incapable of not doing it, even in moments that didn't require it. He noticed everything. It was not optional. He found Amara in the mansion library at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks into her time there. She told the evening staff she was looking for a book to read Sophia. The child had asked for something about stars. She had not expected the library to be occupied. She had not expected, therefore, to be observed opening the glass cabinet on the east wall where Marco kept his more serious reading, corporate governance law, financial regulation texts, a 3rd edition of an international business compliance guide, and removing the compliance guide to cross-reference something she'd seen in a document photograph. She heard the footstep a moment too late. The children's books, Dominic said from the doorway, are on the lower shelf. His voice was even, not accusatory, just precise. Amara set the guide down, kept her face neutral. Sophia asked me to find something about stars. I got turned around. Dominic walked into the room without hurrying, picked up the corporate governance guide from where she'd set it on the side table. Read the spine. Set it back down. He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be intentional. My sister has hands like yours, he said finally. She's a surgeon. 12 years of training. There's a particular quality to hands that have spent years doing precision work. They move differently. They're still in a different way. He looked at her hands. You don't have housekeeping hands, Miss Cole. The name landed with weight. She hadn't told him her name. He'd used her real one. I've been doing security for 11 years, he continued. I can tell the difference between someone who works with their hands and someone who doesn't. More importantly, he paused, I can tell the difference between someone who is here to harm this household and someone who isn't. I ran a full profile on you 4 days ago. Amara held his gaze. Calculated. Made a decision. Are you going to tell Mr. Marchetti? That depends on what you're here to protect, and what you're here to find. Another pause. Longer this time. His operation is legitimate, she said carefully. Largely. I needed to verify that independently before committing $300 million of my investors' capital to a partnership with this family. That's what I'm here to find. Dominic was quiet for a moment that she couldn't read. Then he sat down in one of the leather chairs across from her. Then, he said, we have a problem in common. He told her about the accounts he'd found, the transfers he couldn't explain, the conversations he'd overheard between Elena and a number on her private phone that didn't correspond to anyone in the household's contact system. He'd flagged it to Marco twice. Marco had dismissed him both times. He doesn't want to see it, Dominic said. He's been trying to make this marriage work for 6 years. He's chosen not to look at certain things. Can you help me document it? I've been documenting it for 3 months. I've been waiting for someone who could do something with what I have. He looked at her steadily. I just didn't expect that person to be hiding in the nursery. Mrs. Caruso had not needed to run a security profile. Mrs. Caruso, 61 years old, 22 years with the Marchetti household, built like someone who had been cooking for armies her entire life, had known from day one. She didn't say anything. She just left extra food outside Amara's door at night. A bowl of something warm, covered. Always there when Amara came upstairs after midnight. Always gone by morning. No acknowledgement in the daylight hours. She found Amara in the kitchen before dawn, 3 days after the gala invitation. You're planning something for Saturday. It wasn't a question. I'm attending a gala. And what? Something appropriate. Mrs. Caruso looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who had watched this household from the inside for 2 decades and had very specific feelings about what she'd witnessed. Elena, she said finally, has humiliated every woman who has ever worked in this house. Every one. The cook before the one before me. A woman named Rita who'd been cooking professionally for 30 years, left in the middle of service one evening because of something Elena said to her in front of guests. The nanny before you. The personal assistant before that. She set a cup of coffee on the counter near Amara. Not handed to her. Just placed there. Whatever you're planning, don't be modest about it. The phone call with James happened on a Friday evening, from the small window of her third-floor room. James, it's me. Boss. Relief in his voice, immediate and unguarded. It's been 7 weeks. The board is developing creative new ways to express concern. Tell them sabbatical. I've told them sabbatical 4 times. They're starting to not believe me. Tell them research. James, listen. She kept her voice low, her eye on the garden wall below the window. I need you to arrange something for tomorrow. Anything. The Bvlgari set. The Magnifica collection, the Alexandrite necklace, the bracelet, the earrings. It's in the private safe at the penthouse. You have the combination. Silence on the other end. Then, boss, the custom Dior. The emerald piece from the Paris atelier, the commission from last spring. It's in climate storage. 3rd rack, garment bag with the white ribbon. The emerald Dior, James said slowly. And the full Bvlgari set. Hair and makeup team. The penthouse suite at the Meridian across from the Bellini Grand. I need to be there by 4 tomorrow afternoon. What time do you want to arrive at the gala? 9:15. The gala starts at 7:30. I know. James absorbed this. She could hear him understanding it. Let her think you're not coming. Let her relax. Let her start enjoying herself. Let her tell her friends I was too intimidated. And then I walk in. A pause. Then James, quietly. Is this about the partnership? Amara looked at the garden wall, at the evening light moving across the stone. The investigation is complete, she said. The Marchetti development operation is legitimate. The laundering is historical legacy. Marco's been closing it out for 4 years. He's not the liability. Then why? Elena has 3 shell accounts running through a structure Marco doesn't know about. I have the documentation. Dominic has corroborating records. The partnership is safe to execute once those accounts are exposed and dissolved. I'll announce the terms Saturday. So it is about the partnership. She didn't answer immediately. She thought about a Tuesday night in the kitchen at midnight, about a man standing at an open refrigerator looking at nothing, still in his suit jacket, tie loose, with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been performing for so long they'd forgotten what it cost, about a glass of water set on a counter near her without ceremony, about the question he'd asked, what kind of person doesn't know any stories about stars, and the look on his face when she'd answered it. It started as the partnership, she said finally. But Saturday is for every woman in this house who never got to answer back. She had tried not to think about the kitchen. She had been, broadly speaking, unsuccessful, because the kitchen at midnight was where Marco Marchetti stopped being a subject of investigation and became a person. It happened gradually, across several nights. She hadn't planned it, had in fact actively tried to avoid it, but the kitchen was the one place in the mansion where the performance stopped, where the controlled, carefully maintained surface that he wore through every business meeting and every social obligation and every dinner where Elena talked over him simply fell away. He would come down at midnight, sometimes later, sometimes in the suit he'd worn all day with the jacket removed, sometimes in something more ordinary. He would stand at the refrigerator for a moment that lasted longer than the task required, as though the cold air were doing something for him that nothing else was. He never expected anyone. The first time it happened, 3 weeks in, they'd both been startled. She'd offered to leave. He'd told her to stay, and then seemed mildly surprised that he'd said it. They'd been quiet together for a while. Then he'd asked about Sophia, something specific that showed he'd been paying attention to what his daughter talked about at dinner. And Amara had answered, and he'd listened, and the conversation had moved in the way conversations moved when two people were being, briefly and improbably themselves. He had asked about the stars. She had told him, because Sophia asked every night, that Orion's belt was actually 3 stars so far apart from each other that the light from one wouldn't reach another for millions of years, that they only appeared close from where they were standing. That distance could be an illusion if you were looking from the right angle. Marco had been quiet after that. That's the best explanation of perspective I've ever heard, he'd said finally, and I've sat through a lot of very expensive philosophy courses. She had almost laughed. She had decided not to, but she had thought about that moment for the rest of the night. He sent for her on Thursday, 2 days before the gala. Mr. Marchetti wants to see you in the study. Mrs. Caruso delivered the message, with the carefully neutral expression of someone delivering news they've decided not to editorialize. Did he say why? He looked curious, Mrs. Caruso said. Not angry. Curious. The study was all dark wood and leather, the kind of room that had been designed to communicate seriousness. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, 2 monitors displaying financial dashboards, a desk wide enough to have its own geography, a window that looked out onto the front drive where the iron gates stood open in the daytime and closed at night. He was standing when she came in, which was the first thing she noted. Most employers did not stand for household staff. Close the door, please. She did. Kept her posture neutral, eyes slightly down. The performance maintained. Sit. She sat. How long have you been with us? 47 days, sir. And you're attending the gala Saturday. Your wife invited me, sir. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Something moved in his jaw. A controlled tension. My wife, he said carefully, has a particular way of extending invitations that aren't intended as invitations. He looked at her directly. You don't have to go. I appreciate that, sir. I'd like to attend. He studied her. The way Dominic had studied her. The way Mrs. Caruso had. The specific quality of attention that meant someone was looking past the surface at something they couldn't quite name. You're not like the rest of the staff, he said. Sir, I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm telling you what I've observed. He leaned back in his chair. Your hands are educated. Your speech is trained without being affected. You move through this house like someone who is accustomed to moving through larger spaces. A pause. 3 weeks ago I had your employment records reviewed. Her pulse was steady. It took effort. They're clean, he continued. Your references check out. Your identification is valid. But it all has a particular quality to it. The quality of things that have been assembled rather than accumulated. She said nothing. Are you investigating me, Miss Cole? The directness of it. No preamble. No approach. Just a question, placed directly in front of her. She made a decision. The kind that can't be unmade. I was evaluating whether you were worth trusting. Silence. He didn't reach for a phone. He didn't call for Dominic. He looked at her with an expression she was still working to read. And am I? More than you know, sir. He stood. Walked to the window. Stood with his back to her for a moment that she let breathe. I know what Elena did with the invitation, he said. I know why she did it. He turned. I've known who you are for 11 days, Miss Cole. The room contracted. Amara held completely still. 47 days. 47 days of a perfect cover, of $14 uniforms and careful postures, and performed deference. He had known for 11 of them. I could have asked you to leave, he said. I could have had Dominic handle it, quietly, no drama. He paused. I chose not to. Why? He looked at her for a long moment. Because I wanted to see what you were looking for. Another pause. And whether you'd find it. He walked to the door. Opened it. Saturday, Miss Cole. He didn't look back. Don't come as the nanny. He stopped. One hand on the door frame. And Amara, whatever you plan for Elena. He said her name the way people say names they've been saying privately for a while, and are only now saying aloud. Don't hold back. The Meridian Hotel penthouse suite had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out across Fifth Avenue toward the Bellini Grand, where valet attendants were already directing cars, and the string quartet could be heard from the pavement below as guests began to arrive. Amara watched this from the window in a hotel robe, her hair loose, while her team worked around her. James had arranged everything. He always did. The Dior gown hung on the wardrobe door in its garment bag. She'd asked him not to open it yet. She wanted a moment before that. The Bvlgari case was open on the vanity, and even in a room full of people who worked with beautiful things, it had produced a pause when James first opened it. The Magnifica collection, the Alexandrite centerpiece, 47 carats of stone that shifted between deep green and burgundy, depending on the light, surrounded by a constellation of white diamonds set in platinum. The bracelet, the earrings, the set together, appraised at $2.1 million. Board gift. IPO celebration. She thanked him graciously and locked it in the penthouse safe, and hadn't thought about it since. She was thinking about it now. James stood near the window beside her, his hands in his pockets, watching the cars arrive at the Bellini Grand. I've been your COO for 6 years, he said. I know. I have watched you close a Series D round in 48 hours when we had a runway problem. I have watched you sit across from 3 federal regulators simultaneously and not blink once. I have watched you rebuild an entire division structure over a long weekend and present it Monday morning like you'd slept perfectly. James, I have never, in 6 years, watched you get ready for something the way you're getting ready for this. She looked at him. Is that a problem? He considered. No, he said. It's just the first time I've seen you do something for yourself. She didn't answer that. She turned from the window, opened the garment bag. The Emerald Dior had taken 6 seamstresses in a Paris atelier 11 weeks to complete. The commission had been made the previous spring, a gift to herself after a quarter that had been harder than she'd let anyone see. The color was specific, not the generic green of formal fashion, but the deep, saturated, precise green of a particular stone she'd seen in a museum in Florence years ago and never forgotten. The kind of green that didn't ask to be looked at. It simply was, and looking became inevitable. The cut was architectural. Structured shoulders that didn't announce themselves. They simply created a frame that the posture she'd been hiding for 47 days could finally inhabit correctly. A neckline that required confidence to wear, and which would look like exactly that on someone who had it. A floor-length skirt that moved like something living. It was not the dress of someone trying to make a point. It was the dress of someone who had always had a point and was finally allowing the room to understand it. She put it on. Her hair was styled last, natural, full, shaped into itself rather than into something else. Not altered, not minimized, not apologized for. When the team stepped back and she looked at the full mirror for the first time, the room was quiet for a moment. James cleared his throat. Elena Marchetti, he said, is going to need a very good therapist. She might, Amara said. That's okay. Growth is available to everyone. She reached for the Bvlgari necklace. Her stylist held it up for her. The Alexandrite stone caught the light in the hotel suite and threw it back differently. Green, then burgundy, then something in between that had no name. She felt the weight of it settle at her collar. She looked at herself in the mirror. 32 years old. Harvard Medical School. Founder and CEO of Cole Health Innovations. Worth $1.4 billion. Going to a party. What time? James asked. 9:15, she said. Not a minute before. The Bellini Grand Ballroom at 9 o'clock was precisely what Elena Marchetti had designed it to be. Beautiful, in the specific way of rooms that have been arranged to impress people who are already impressed by most things. Crystal chandeliers that threw light in fragments across white tablecloths and diamond earrings, and the particular expressions of people who were performing philanthropy for the social benefits it provided. A string quartet in the corner that no one was listening to. Waitstaff in white jackets moving through the crowd with champagne that had been chosen because the label was recognizable. Elena was at the center of it, as she was always at the center of things she had arranged. The red Valentino gown was perfect for the room. It was designed to be noticed, and it was noticed. She moved through the crowd accepting compliments with the practiced modesty of someone who had spent years learning exactly how much false humility was charming. The cause is so close to my heart, she told a journalist positioned near the host's table. These communities, they need advocacy. They need someone willing to stand up. Claudia appeared at her elbow, champagne glass raised. Your little project hasn't shown up, she said under her breath, smiling at someone across the room. Elena checked the diamond bracelet on her wrist. A reflex. 9 o'clock. She was supposed to be here at 7:30. Her smile stayed in place. I think the poor thing looked at her wardrobe and made a sensible decision. Renata nearby. Or she realized what the room would look like and thought better of it. Elena laughed. An unguarded laugh, the real one, not the performance version. The laugh of someone who had already won. Across the ballroom, Marco Marchetti stood with two business associates, holding a glass of something he hadn't touched, listening to a conversation he wasn't following. His eye moved to the grand entrance at intervals he was trying to make less regular than they were. Dominic appeared at his shoulder. She's here, Dominic said quietly. Marco looked at his watch. 9:14. He looked toward the entrance. Now, Dominic said. The grand ballroom doors of the Bellini were 12 feet tall, gilded at the edges, flanked by a marble staircase that descended in two elegant curves from the mezzanine level above. They were designed to make arrivals feel like arrivals. They opened at 9:15, and the room changed. It didn't taper. It didn't gradually quiet. The sound, 500 people, conversation and laughter, and the ambient electricity of a room full of important people being important stopped. Not gradually. Immediately. Like a conductor had cut the orchestra at the downbeat. And every instrument stopped at once. Every face turned. Elena's laugh died in the middle of a syllable. The journalist lowered his recorder. Claudia's champagne glass stopped its progress toward her lips and stayed there, suspended, forgotten. And at the top of the marble staircase, framed by the gilded doors, lit by the chandelier above in a way that seemed calculated, but was simply the result of standing exactly where she was meant to stand, was Amara Cole. She stood still for exactly 1 moment. She did not pose. She did not perform. She simply paused, as someone pauses who has walked into a room and found exactly what they expected to find, and is in no hurry. The emerald door gown was the color of something ancient and certain. The structured shoulders carried authority that didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. The fabric moved. At the hem, in a way that light moved across water. The Bvlgari necklace gathered every source of light in the ballroom and reorchestrated it. The Alexandrite stone shifting in the chandelier's warmth from deep green to something approaching burgundy and back again. And several people would later say that they had recognized the Magnifica collection before they recognized anything else about her. Her hair was everything. Her posture was the truth of her, finally allowed to be exactly itself. She did not look like a nanny who had dressed up. She did not look like someone who had borrowed something beautiful to attend a party above her station. She looked like what she was A woman of extraordinary substance who had been in this room's company for 47 days and had only now decided to introduce herself correctly. She began to descend the stairs. Every step deliberate, every step unhurried. Along the staircase, on both sides, guests who had been mid-conversation, mid-drink, mid-sentence, had turned to watch and stayed that way. Hands partially raised, glasses tilted, mouths slightly open. The women in their gowns looking at the Bvlgari necklace, and then at each other. The men in their black tie doing the calculation that people do when power walks into a room and announces itself without a word. On the right side of the staircase, a man in a perfectly cut tuxedo had his hand over his mouth. His companion's eyes were wide and fixed, tracking the descent with the expression of someone watching something they will describe to people for years. Near the base of the stairs, Dominic, in his security position, phone angled with the careful casualness of someone who has been recording for a while already, his face wearing the expression of a man who has been waiting 3 months for this moment and finds it exactly as satisfying as he'd imagined. Behind the catering station, Mrs. Caruso, still in her white service jacket. She had set down her tray. Both hands were pressed, gently, over her mouth. At the back of the room, Amara Marchetti, who had stopped pretending to listen to his business associates approximately 4 seconds after the doors opened, and who was watching with something in his expression that was entirely unprofessional, and that he was not, at this precise moment, attempting to manage. And at the center, Elena, champagne glass in hand, red Valentino, the smile that had been in place for 3 hours now entirely absent, replaced by something that was cycling rapidly between colors she had no name for. The glass slipped from her fingers. It fell, struck the marble floor, shattered. No one moved to help her. No one moved at all. Amara reached the base of the staircase. She smiled, the warm, gracious, lethal smile of a woman who is exactly where she intended to be, and walked forward, directly toward Elena. Every eye in the ballroom followed. This was not revenge. Revenge is what you do when you've been hurt. This was something more precise than that. This was a correction, an accounting, a truth that had been waiting 47 days to be spoken in a room large enough to deserve it. Drop a heart if you've been waiting for this moment. She walked in wearing $2 million in diamonds, and the room forgot how to breathe. She stopped 4 feet from Elena Marchetti, close enough that every person in the immediate vicinity could hear every word. Mrs. Marchetti. Her voice was even, warm even. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was genuinely thoughtful of you to include me. Elena's mouth opened, closed. The words, whichever one she had intended, did not come. I wasn't entirely sure what to wear, Amara continued. She touched the Bvlgari necklace lightly, one fingertip against the Alexandrite. You said black tie. I hope this is appropriate. The murmur moved through the crowd like weather. Specific. Particular. Is that the Bvlgari Magnifica collection? The Alexandrite piece. I've seen it in auction catalogs. Combined value on that set is over 2 million. Who is she? Elena found something. Not quite her voice. Something thinner than her voice. You were. She stopped. Tried again. You scrubbed Sophia's bathroom floor. I saw you. I was conducting due diligence, Amara said. Simply. As though this were the most ordinary thing to say in a ballroom full of 500 people in formal wear. Your husband's development company approached mine about a partnership. $300 million and 3 pediatric health centers. Before committing that capital, I wanted to understand the operation personally. The room's temperature changed. I spent 47 days in your household, Amara continued. I cleaned. I observed. I documented. She let that settle for a moment, and I learned something I hadn't expected to learn. She turned her head, very slightly, and found Marco across the room. He met her gaze. Your husband runs a legitimate operation. His business model is sound. His staff are paid above market rate. He knows their names. He remembers their birthdays. He is doing something genuinely difficult, building something clean from a complicated history. And he is doing it with more integrity than most people in this room would manage in that situation. Marco's expression shifted. The controlled surface, cracked, briefly, by something unguarded. He is worth the investment. She looked at Elena. In every sense. You. Elena's voice had found something firmer, though it was not stability. It was the firmness of desperation. You came into my home under false pretenses. You deceived us. You. I applied for a position through a licensed employment agency, Amara said. I was interviewed. I was background checked. I was hired. A pause. No one asked who I was. You saw the uniform and decided the answer wasn't worth your time. She turned slightly to address the room, not performing, simply acknowledging that the room was there and had a right to what came next. I also want to address something else, she said. For the record, Elena Marchetti has been operating 3 shell financial accounts through a structure that her husband is unaware of. I have the documentation. My head of security, she glanced at Dominic, has corroborating records that he flagged to Mr. Marchetti twice. The exposure this created for any prospective partner of Marchetti Group was significant. It is the reason I conducted this evaluation personally, rather than through standard channels. She paused. Those accounts will need to be dissolved as a condition of any partnership proceeding. I expect that to be handled through legal counsel within the next 30 days. The ballroom was silent in the way that ballrooms rarely are. Elena had gone from red to white. The process had taken approximately 40 seconds. You invited me here, Amara said, and her voice now was not unkind. It was something beyond kindness or unkindness, something that simply told the truth without embellishment. To entertain your friends. To let them watch the nanny try to fit in with real people. I heard that. I heard all of it. She looked at Elena directly. But the joke was never on me, Mrs. Marchetti. It was never going to be. You looked at my uniform and decided you understood everything about me. You saw service work and read powerlessness into it. You saw a woman of color doing domestic work and assumed that was the correct and complete picture. A pause. That says nothing about me. It says everything about you. A man cut through the crowd from the left, distinguished, late 50s, the expression of someone who has been confused for several minutes and has decided to enter the situation anyway. Amara. He was out of breath, slightly. I've been trying to reach you for 7 weeks. Hello, Richard. Your assistant said sabbatical. What is? He looked at the room. At Elena. At the shattered champagne glass that no one had cleaned up. What is happening here? Long story. I'll send you a summary Monday. She turned. Richard Osei, meet Marco Marchetti. I'm executing the partnership agreement. 300 million, standard terms, the original structure with one amended condition, set that my legal team will transmit tomorrow morning. Marco had moved through the crowd and was standing now 10 feet away. He looked at her. Something complicated and certain moved across his face. You're serious. Your operation is clean. Your model is sound. She looked at him directly. And you treat people with dignity. From the edge of the room, Dominic's voice, clear and carrying. For anyone keeping account, she applied for the nanny position through a licensed agency in good standing. She was interviewed by your household manager. She was issued proper employment documentation. She performed the duties of the position she was hired for. A beat. No false pretenses. You simply never asked who she was. From the catering station, Mrs. Caruso, who had entirely abandoned any pretense of being on shift. I asked. First week. She said she needed work. A pause. Technically accurate. The crowd laughed. The laughter spread. Real laughter, not cruel, just the release of a room that had been holding its breath. Elena turned to Marco. One last attempt. Are you going to let her? Marco Marchetti looked at his wife. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment, and then he said the thing that ended it. You humiliated yourself, Elena. She simply allowed the room to see it. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of contract negotiations and legal meetings and careful professional distance maintained on both sides, as though if neither of them acknowledged what was accumulating in the space between business conversations, it might remain manageable. It was not remaining manageable. Amara was in her actual office, 28th floor, windows from floor to ceiling. The city spread below in the particular way that had once felt like evidence of something she'd accomplished and now felt like backdrop when James knocked. Mr. Marchetti is here. No appointment. Send him in. He looked different outside the context of the mansion. The same man, careful, controlled. with that quality of stillness that she had first noticed in a kitchen at midnight, but without the house around him, without the role he had been performing in that space. He looked more plainly like himself, which was, she noted, both less armored and more substantial. "I signed the divorce papers this morning," he said, without preamble. Elena agreed to a quiet settlement. "She's moving to Milan." "How is she?" She said. He paused, considered. "She said you were right. About looking at people. About what you see when you don't." He sat across from her desk. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "for why I didn't say anything when I found out who you were." "You don't." "I do." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "The logical choice, the controlled choice, was to have you removed quietly and efficiently. I told myself I was waiting to understand your intentions. That was partly true." He was quiet for a moment, but the real reason was simpler and less defensible. "Every night when I couldn't sleep and I knew you were in the kitchen, I told myself I was going down for water. I told myself that for 3 weeks before I stopped bothering to pretend." He looked at her directly. "I've been in a marriage that was an arrangement for 6 years. A business agreement that benefited 2 families and cost both of us something I don't have a precise word for. I forgot what it felt like to be in a room with someone and be less alone because of it." A pause. "You did that, in a nanny uniform, with crayon on your sleeve, while you were running a corporate intelligence operation in my house." A beat. "I fell in love with you somewhere between the stories about stars and the midnight kitchen. I thought you should know that regardless of how you receive it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, walked around the desk, and kissed him. When she pulled back, he was very still, and then something in his face that had been carefully maintained for a very long time quietly released. "So," he said, "the CEO of a pediatric health company is dating a man with a complicated family history who is actively trying to make it less complicated. The former CEO of a pediatric health company is dating a man who told her to destroy his wife at a gala." I said, "Don't hold back." "Same thing." He touched her face, gently. The same hands that had managed an empire and placed a glass of water near her in a kitchen at midnight without making a gesture of it. A businessman in love with a woman who scrubbed floors to protect $300 million. "When you say it that way, I sound extremely thorough." "You sound," he said, "exactly like yourself." James's voice through the intercom, apologetic in the particular way of someone who has been waiting as long as they professionally could. "Boss, I'm sorry to interrupt. Mrs. Caruso is downstairs. She's brought food. She says you both look underfed, and she's not leaving the lobby until she's fed you." Amara looked at Marco. Marco looked at Amara. "Send her up," Amara said. Mrs. Caruso entered 3 minutes later, carrying 2 containers of food that smelled like Sunday, and the particular expression of someone who has been right about something significant and is allowing herself to feel that fully. "I knew," she said, setting the containers on the desk without being invited to. "I told Dominic the first week. I said, watch those 2. She said she needed work, and he keeps going down for water after midnight, and neither of those things are the whole truth." "You bet on us?" Marco asked. "Of course." She opened the first container. "I won €120 over 6 weeks. Dominic is very bad at betting against things that are clearly going to happen." 6 months later, the Cole Health Innovations annual gala was not, strictly speaking, a gala. It was a fundraiser and a launch, the formal public announcement of the first 3 pediatric health centers scheduled to break ground that spring, in 3 cities, in communities that had been waiting for something like this for a long time. The room was full. Not with the specific kind of people who had filled the Bellini Grand Ballroom, not with the performance of wealth for its own sake, but with the people who had been part of building something, and the people who would benefit from it, and the people who stood in the particular intersection between those 2 groups. Amara stood on the stage in a gown she had chosen simply because it was beautiful. No statement, no strategy, just a woman in a room she had built, wearing something she liked. "This foundation exists because of something I learned in an unexpected classroom," she said. 47 days in a house where I was invisible by design, where I watched people who worked harder than anyone in any boardroom I've ever sat in, move through their days unseen, unremarked. treated as part of the architecture. She found Mrs. Caruso in the front row. Mrs. Caruso, tonight, was not in a service uniform. She was in something elegant and understated, and she was sitting in the front row with Dominic beside her. Dominic in an actual suit, looking deeply uncomfortable and deeply proud simultaneously. And she was crying already, which she had decided she was allowed to do. A woman named Mrs. Caruso left food outside my door every night for 7 weeks, Amara said. She never asked why I was there or what I was doing or who I was. She simply made sure I wasn't hungry. She is the reason the community kitchens in all 3 of our new centers, the kitchens that will feed the families of children receiving care, because you cannot heal a child in a family that is hungry, are named in her honor. From the audience, someone started to applaud. Then everyone did. Mrs. Caruso pressed her hand over her mouth and cried harder. I went undercover to verify a business partner, Amara continued. I stayed because I was finding something I hadn't expected to find. I walked into a gala, wearing a dress I had commissioned in Paris and a necklace worth more than some buildings, not because I needed the room to know who I was, but because one woman's cruelty needed to be answered with the truth it was trying to avoid. She looked at Marco at the side of the stage, and I learned that the people society moves around, the people we step over without breaking stride, are often the ones who see us most clearly. They see us without the armor, without the performance. They see what we do when we think no one is looking. She paused. I was always looking. After, the crowd moving toward the exits, the city outside continuing in its perpetual motion, indifferent and magnificent. Amara found the balcony without quite deciding to. The night air was cool and specific, the particular cold of a city evening in spring, when winter is recent enough that warmth still feels like a gift. Marco found her there. Elena sent a message, he said. He stood beside her at the railing, not touching, just present. She watched the live stream of the announcement. She says, he paused. She says the community kitchen naming was more than she deserved, given everything. It wasn't for her. I know. He was quiet for a moment. She's been in therapy for 4 months. She said something happened to her at the gala. Not what she expected to happen. She said she looked at you and saw, for the first time, what she'd been doing. Not to you. To herself. He paused. She said to tell you that you were right about dignity. Growth is possible for everyone. She's beginning to believe that. Below them, the city moved. Above them, the sky held whatever stars could be seen through the ambient light of a city that never fully darkened. Sophia asked about you, he said. This morning. She asked when Mara was coming to the apartment. What did you tell her? Asterisk, I told her Mara lives with us now. She thought about that for a moment and then said, and I'm quoting directly, I know Daddy. I meant when is she coming home from the party? Amara laughed. The real kind. The kind that had been rarer than it should have been for most of her adult life. He put his arm around her, and she let herself lean, slightly, into the solidity of him. Mrs. Caruso's voice floated up from the balcony below. Dominic. They're up there, and they're kissing again. You owe me 40 euros. Dominic's grown, resigned and genuine. I need to stop making bets with you. Yes, Mrs. Caruso said, with the satisfaction of someone who has been right about everything that mattered. You do. She had gone in to protect an investment. She had stayed because something unexpected was worth staying for. She had walked into a room in an emerald Dior gown and $2 million of diamonds not to win. She had already won, before she put on the necklace, before she descended the stairs, before anyone in that ballroom had turned to look. She had walked in to tell the truth. The truth was that dignity doesn't live in titles. It doesn't live in uniforms or gowns or the square footage of the house you move through. It lives in what you do in the moments when you believe no one of consequence is watching. Amara Cole had been watching. For 47 days, she had been watching. And when she walked through those gilded doors and descended that marble staircase, and the room went silent around her, she was not arriving. She was returning. To herself. To the full, unqualified truth of who she had always been. The nanny had never existed. She had simply been waiting for the right moment. On her own terms. In the right dress. From $14 uniform to $2 million on that staircase. Drop a heart if this one stayed with you. Amara didn't just walk into that room. She reclaimed it. Subscribe to Korean Mafia Tales. Because every woman who has ever made herself smaller than she is deserves a story that ends exactly like this one.